In a town forgotten by time, where the wind carried whispers of hardship like drifting tumbleweeds, Everly Tate stood at the threshold of the trading post, her heart thudding louder than the hooves of any rider. The sun had just slipped below. The horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, and the rafters of the wooden building cast long, trembling shadows across her worn boots. She clutched the swaddled bundle in her arms as if it were her very breath, her slender shoulders rising and falling with each uneven breath. Inside, the trading post lay heavy with the scent of tanned leather and spilled molasses. Lanterns burned, low on oil, sending wavering patterns of light across rows of guns and bolts of cloth. Behind the counter, Silas Crawley awaited his next customer, his frame massive yet deliberate, his gaze as steady as a hawk's. He watched Everly with a guarded curiosity. Noting the way her fingers trembled as she drew nearer, Everly's mind raced back to the moment. The boy had been born tiny and red-faced in the backroom of this very building, his first cries muffled by the brittle wooden walls. She had held him close, feeling the fierce pulse of new life against her chest. The world beyond these walls had been unkind to mothers like her, widowed, worn, and left without mercy. She had prayed for a miracle, and for a moment she believed she might be strong enough to give her son a future. But as the weeks passed and the meager coin at her side dwindled, desperation had settled over her like dust. Now at the edge of ruin, she held his warmth before a stranger. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run and protect him with whatever she had left. Yet hunger gnawed at her belly, colder than any winter wind, and thoughts of her son's empty stomach pushed her forward. Silas stepped from behind the counter, his boots creaking softly on the plank floor. "Evening, miss," he said, voice low as the distant train whistle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Everly swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need supplies, Mr. Crawley. Flour, sugar, blankets." He studied the bundle. "Is that?" She closed her eyes, pressed her lips together, and nodded. "My boy, I have coin for a few goods, but I can't feed us both." Silas's brow furrowed. "You're saying, I can't." The words cracked on her lips like dry timber. "I can't watch him starve." He reached out, gently easing the cloth aside to reveal the infant's sleeping face, a delicate crescent of peace in a harsh world. His rugged features softened, and for a heartbeat, the trading post fell silent save for the distant clank of the railroad. Everly looked away, tears brimming. "Take him," she implored, voice trembling. "I beg you, please. I'll come back for him when I can." Before Silas could respond, the door swung open with a burst of wind, carrying in a tall figure framed by the dust-choked twilight. His boots were polished, his duster long and beige, and in his hand gleamed a silver star, pinned to his chest. The man paused at the threshold, surveying Everly and the child. "Evenin'," he drawled, voice like warm whiskey over ice. "Name's Judd McCall. I'm looking for supplies and perhaps a bit more." He tipped his hat, revealing steel gray eyes that locked onto the infant, kind of thin for a newborn. "You need help, miss?" Everly's breath hitched. Judd's presence felt different, steady, reassuring, and somehow safe. She swallowed, her voice thick with shame and hope. I don't have enough coin." Judd took a step closer, boots thudding on the wooden floor. He glanced at Silas, who merely nodded. Judd reached deep into his pocket and produced a small leather pouch heavy with gold dust. He held it out. "I'll take you both. Enough coin. Here to cover what you need, and then some." Everly stared, disbelief warring with relief. I don't understand." Judd knelt, bringing himself eye to eye with the baby. No one should face hunger alone. "Name's Judd McCall, and if it's all the same, I'd be honored to look after him." He swept the pouch across the counter, gold flickering in the lantern light dot in that moment. Everly felt a tremor of hope crack the ice around her heart. She took a step forward, uncertain, then another, leaning toward the promise that this stranger offered. The door rattled again, wind gusting in, as if the world itself held its breath. And in the hush that followed, Judd reached for the bundle, cradling the sleeping child with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. Everly's knees weakened. She closed her eyes, bracing herself against the counter. When she opened them, she saw Judd's unwavering gaze upon her. "Go on," he said softly. "I've got him." She swallowed the lump in her throat, nodded once, then turned. Each step toward the door felt like the heaviest journey she'd ever taken. But behind her, she heard Judd quietly promise, "You're not alone." Outside, the wind had risen, whipping tumbleweeds across the dusty street. Everly paused, hand on the doorframe, then looked back to see Judd standing tall in the lantern light, the baby secured in his arms. Her voice barely found its way past her lips. "Thank you," he gave a small nod. "Come back when you can." Everly stepped out into the twilight, the door swinging closed behind her with a soft thud. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The night air pressed heavy on Everly's skin as she walked away from the trading post, each step a defiance against every instinct that begged her to turn around. She didn't make it far before her knees buckled and she collapsed beneath the slatted awning of the old blacksmith's barn, hidden in shadows and the scent of scorched iron. The dry sob that tore from her throat wasn't the loud kind, it was the sound of something being torn slowly, cell by cell, from her soul. Inside the trading post, Judd McCall rocked the baby gently, his arms sure and strong. The child stirred only slightly, lulled by the warmth of his new caretaker. Silas Crawley watched from across the counter, his arms folded, one brow raised. "You sure about this, McCall?" he asked after a long silence. Judd glanced down at the bundle, his expression unreadable. "Not sure of much lately, but I know what it means to be left with nothing." Silas scratched at the graying stubble on his jaw. "You planning on taking them both with you?" "I reckon she's not ready for that." "Not yet, but I'll stay close," Judd replied. "Some folks fall so deep into the dark, they need someone to strike a match first." Meanwhile, Everly sat curled on herself like a question mark, her arms wrapped around her ribs as if holding her grief inside. She wasn't crying anymore, not visibly. She stared at the stars above the barn's open rafters, their cold flicker a stark contrast to the heat of the tears drying on her cheeks. A creak of wood warned her someone approached. She scrambled upright, bracing to flee until Judd's shadow stepped into view. He stopped a few feet away, boots crunching softly in the dust. "Didn't mean to follow you," he said, his voice quiet, unthreatening. "But I figured you'd want to know he's asleep, safe." Everly looked away. He never cried when he was hungry. Just looked at me like he knew I had nothing. Judd crouched, resting his forearms on his knees. "What's his name?" She hesitated. "Micah, after my father," he nodded. "Strong name." They sat in silence, broken only by the distant rustle of prairie grass and the low whistle of wind between the barn slats. Judd didn't press, didn't ask her to explain more. That quiet respect wrapped around her like a blanket. Eventually, Everly asked, "Why did you help me? You don't know me." Judd looked past her to the distant ridge where the moon crested. "I was a boy in a mining town. My Mayo gave me up to a preacher when the cholera took half the valley. Said he had more than she ever could. I didn't understand then, but I do now." Everly's voice wavered. "You resent her?" He shook his head slowly. "She did what she had to. Sometimes survival don't look like heroism, it looks like heartbreak." Long silence settled. Then, quietly she asked, "What now?" Judd stood and extended a hand. "Now we go back. You sleep under a roof. And tomorrow we figure out how to start again." She stared at the outstretched hand, her pride clawing at her. Then she took it. His grip was warm, grounding. Back inside the trading post, Silas had made up a cot in the back room. It was little more than a wool blanket stretched across hay padding, but to Everly, it looked like salvation. She sat on the edge, watching as Judd laid Micah into a lined crate near the hearth. "Could have fooled me," Silas muttered as he passed by. "Thought you were just another drifter with a shiny badge." Judd offered a lopsided grin. "Even a drifter can recognize someone worth standing still for." He stoked the fire, the light dancing across Everly's hollow cheeks. She'd lost more weight than she realized. Her dress sagged at the shoulders, yet her eyes wide and haunted held a flicker now. Not trust, but maybe something adjacent to it. "You need work," Silas said bluntly. Everly nodded slowly. "I do. I'll take anything." He nodded toward a stack of flour sacks in the corner. "Got deliveries that need sorting. Customers need letters written. And the windows, those need washing something fierce. I can do all of that. Good." Judd folded his coat and placed it beside the cot. "I'll be around in the mornings." Heading north after a few days to check on a rancher friend, he's got work too, if you're up for travel. Everly looked to Micah, then to Judd. "Why are you doing this?" He straightened. "Because someday, someone's gonna tell that. Boy, a story. Might as well make sure it's one worth telling." She stared at him a long while, her lips parting, then closing again. There were no words for what she felt. Just a tightening in her chest, a strange mixture of gratitude, shame, and something dangerously close to hope. Judd turned to leave but paused at the door. "Sleep. Tomorrow the world might not change, but you can." As the door closed behind him, Everly lay down, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. Micah sighed in his sleep. A soft wind curled through the shutters, stirring the flame dot, and for the first time in weeks, Everly Tate allowed herself to believe she might not be completely lost. Tomorrow she would rise. Tomorrow she would work. And tomorrow maybe she would begin to forgive herself. Come back for the next chapter. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. It means everything. The sun rose early the next morning, pouring gold over the rooftops of the small, brittle town like a blessing no one had prayed for. Dust lifted in soft clouds from the hoofbeats of a lone rider passing through, and shopkeepers opened their doors with the slow, heavy rhythm of people too familiar with disappointment. But inside the trading post, Everly Tate was already awake, sleeves rolled up, her hands red from the lye soap, and her hair tied back in a messy knot that still couldn't hide the weary determination in her eyes. Micah slept in the crate, a makeshift blanket tucked around him by Silas's wife before she left with the sunrise. Everly cast glances at him between each task sorting flour sacks, folding dry goods, sweeping, and each time she saw his chest rise and fall, something inside her steadied. She'd been walking a tightrope over the abyss for so long, she hadn't realized she could still put one foot in front of the other. By mid-morning, Silas grunted his approval as she lifted 2 sacks onto the counter without hesitation. "Boy eats good," he muttered. "You keep working like this, and you'll have enough credit to feed him better than most." Everly wiped sweat from her brow. "I don't want charity, just work." "You've got that, Miss Tate," he replied, offering a nod that in his language meant something close to respect. The door creaked open behind them, and Judd McCall stepped in, hat in hand, dust clinging to his boots. Everly's heart gave a small leap that she immediately chastised herself for. He looked tired, but his smile was easy. "Silas," he greeted. "Miss Tate." She nodded, keeping her hands busy folding muslin bolts. "I figured I'd stop by before heading north," Judd said, gesturing behind him to where his mare stood tethered to the rail. "My friend in Redstone Ridge needs a hand with fencing and harvest prep. I told him I might know someone willing to earn an honest wage." Everly didn't look up. "I've only just started here. And you're welcome to stay as long as you like," Silas said gruffly. But that ranch pays real coin, has space, a nursery even. Town's bigger than this dustpan. Judd stepped closer, not intruding but present. I won't ask twice, Everly. I know what it's like to be offered something and wonder if it's a trick, but I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm offering a road that leads away from everything you've had to survive. For a long moment, she was quiet, eyes fixed on her child. If I come, she said slowly, it's on my own terms. I won't be anyone's burden. You won't be, Judd said. You'll be what you already are, a mother fighting for her child. Silas cleared his throat, busying himself with a ledger. Go if you want, Everly. This place'll still be here if it don't work out. That night, Everly packed what little she had. A spare blouse, a worn Bible, a cloth doll with a missing eye that she'd clutched through her own childhood. She wrapped Micah tightly and sat beside the crate until dawn began to crest the hills. Judd met her outside, already, saddling a borrowed wagon. He'd brought extra blankets, a tin of biscuits, and a canvas sack of dried fruits. There was a cradle tied securely in the back. Everly hesitated at the step. You sure? She asked. No, he said with a soft grin. But I think it's the best unsure feeling I've had in years. The journey to Redstone Ridge took 2 days. They passed dry riverbeds and abandoned outposts. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and at night, the sky flared with stars so brilliant it made Everly feel like a ghost in a world too large to understand. Judd didn't press her with questions. He shared stories instead of a dog he once raised. Of his first time breaking a horse, of a storm that nearly killed him on a Montana ridge. He spoke of people he'd lost and people who'd given. The sun rose early the next morning, pouring gold over the rooftops of the small, brittle town like a blessing no one had prayed for. Dust lifted in soft clouds from the hoofbeats of a lone rider passing through, and shopkeepers opened their doors with the slow, heavy rhythm of people too familiar with disappointment. But inside the trading post, Everly Tate was already awake, sleeves rolled up, her hands red from the lye soap, and her hair tied back in a messy knot that still couldn't hide the weary determination in her eyes. Micah slept in the crate, a makeshift blanket tucked around him by Silas's wife before she left with the sunrise. Everly cast glances at him between each task sorting flour sacks, folding dry goods, sweeping, and each time she saw his chest rise and fall, something inside her steadied. She'd been walking a tightrope over the abyss for so long, she hadn't realized she could still put one foot in front of the other. By mid-morning, Silas grunted his approval as she lifted 2 sacks onto the counter without hesitation. Boy eats good, he muttered. You keep working like this, and you'll have enough credit to feed him better than most. Everly wiped sweat from her brow. I don't want charity, just work. You've got that, Miss Tate, he replied, offering a nod that in his language meant something close to respect. The door creaked open behind them, and Judd McCall stepped in, hat in hand, dust clinging to his boots. Everly's heart gave a small leap that she immediately chastised herself for. He looked tired, but his smile was easy. Silas, he greeted. Miss Tate. She nodded, keeping her hands busy folding muslin bolts. I figured I'd stop by before heading north, Judd said, gesturing behind him to where his mare stood tethered to the rail. My friend in Redstone Ridge needs a hand with fencing and harvest prep. I told him I might know someone willing to earn an honest wage. Everly didn't look up. I've only just started here. And you're welcome to stay as long as you like, Silas said gruffly. But that ranch pays real coin, has space, a nursery even. Town's bigger than this dustpan. Judd stepped closer, not intruding but present. I won't ask twice, Everly. I know what it's like to be offered something and wonder if it's a trick, but I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm offering a road that. The summer heat settled in like a weight over Redstone Ridge, making every chore feel twice as hard and every breath slow and shallow. The days lengthened, The dirt baked and the prairie grass faded from green to straw. Yet Everly worked through it all, sleeves rolled, hair soaked with sweat, her back straight despite the pain that knotted along her spine. She had known worse, far worse, and now that Micah slept soundly each night with a full belly and gentle hands tending him, there was no chore she wouldn't endure. May Harper proved to be both fair and ruthless. She praised little but missed nothing. One morning, Everly overbaked the cornbread, and May didn't scold. She simply said, "We don't waste wheat here." Everly never overbaked it again. The men on the ranch were wary at first, some too quiet, others too loud. But as the weeks turned into months, they began to nod when she passed, even offering help without being asked. A few whispered of her past, how she'd nearly given up her baby, how she'd been taken in by Judd McCall. But rumors faded when faced with consistency, and Everly gave them no reason to doubt her strength. Judd visited weekly now. He came dusty and sun-worn from the trail, sometimes bruised from a skirmish with rustlers, but he always came. He brought news from neighboring towns, supplies from the trade routes, and the occasional gift, a cloth doll stitched by hand, a flask of sweet cider, a bar of soap that smelled faintly of pine. He never stayed long. He'd tip his hat, help with repairs, smile at Micah, then ride off before the sun fully set. Everly watched him go each time with a strange ache she couldn't name. One evening, a rider thundered in at dusk. His horse was foaming at the mouth, and his hat sat twisted on his head like he'd forgotten he wore it. May met him at the gate. "What is it, Henry?" The man's breath came in ragged gasps. "McCall," he managed. "Ambush, South Canyon." They got him pinned. The air turned still. May's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. Bunch of low-riders from across the border. They want him dead." Everly stepped forward before she realized she was moving. "Where?" Henry looked at her, puzzled. "You can't ride out there, miss. I can't let him die out there," she said, her voice cold and solid. May threw a glance between them, then whistled. "Saddle 2 horses, I'm going too." An hour later, Everly rode hard through the canyon pass, her knuckles white around the reins. May galloped beside her, rifle strapped across her back. The moonlight cut sharp shadows along the canyon walls. They found Judd crouched behind a downed log, one leg bleeding, his rifle nearly out of rounds. His hat was gone, and his shirt was torn, but his eyes lit with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. When he saw Everly slide off her horse and take up her rifle, "You brought her?" He growled at May. "She brought herself," May snapped. Everly dropped beside him, breathless. "You said not to quit, so don't you dare." Judd blinked hard. "They'll circle back, not much time." May tossed him her rifle. "Then let's finish this." The next few minutes blurred gunfire, shouts, sparks as bullets hit stone. Everly didn't flinch. She reloaded with shaking fingers and kept her eyes forward. Judd took a hit to the shoulder but kept firing. May dropped one of the raiders with a clean shot to the chest. When the last of them rode off limping and bleeding, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Judd slumped back, breath ragged. "Damn fools." Everly ripped a strip from her skirt to bind his leg. Her hands were steady now. "You're bleeding out." He winced. "But I'm alive," she met his eyes, "because I came." He smiled faintly. "I was hoping you would." They stayed in the canyon until dawn, waiting to make sure the raiders didn't return. Judd slept in snatches, his head leaning against the log. May watching the horizon with her rifle across her knees. Everly never moved from his side. She kept her hand pressed against the bandage and her eyes on the trail. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was earned. As the sun rose, painting the canyon in golden blood, Judd opened his eyes and whispered, "You didn't give up." She looked at him, her throat tight. "No, and I'm not leaving you behind either." He reached up, fingers brushing hers. "Then maybe, when all this dust settles, we figure out what that means." She nodded slowly. "I'd like that." The wind stirred, soft as breath, and somewhere far behind them, the first light fell on Redstone Ridge. The road ahead would not be easy, but now they'd walk it together. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and ride with us. The storm isn't over yet. The ride back to Redstone Ridge was slow and painful. Judd leaned heavily against Everly in the wagon bed, his wounded leg wrapped tight, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the chill of the morning air. May rode ahead, scouting the trail in silence, her rifle never far from her hand. Everly kept one eye on the road and one on Judd. He drifted in and out of sleep, murmuring nonsense between fevered breaths. She wiped his brow with a damp rag, whispering soft reassurances he may or may not have heard. When they reached the ranch, May shouted orders before her boots hit the ground. Two ranch hands lifted Judd from the wagon, carrying him into the house where the healer, a soft-spoken widow named Mabel, had already set up a clean room. Everly refused to leave his side. She sat on the edge of the bed while Mabel worked, holding Judd's hand and whispering his name like a prayer. The bullet had torn through muscle but missed bone. Still, it left Judd pale and weak, sweat clinging to his skin like a second layer. Days passed in a slow rhythm of sponge baths, broth spooned past cracked lips, and whispered words traded in the dark. On the fourth night, as the stars blinked faintly through the lace curtains, Judd opened his eyes fully. "You still here?" Everly smiled faintly. "Someone had to make sure you didn't bleed to death." He chuckled and winced. "Hurts to laugh." She placed a hand gently on his chest. "Then don't. Just listen." He nodded, and she spoke quietly about Micah, about the ranch, about how May had offered her a permanent place, even a share in the profits come next season. Judd listened without interrupting, his fingers brushing hers as she spoke. "You should." "No," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I don't plan to drift anymore." Everly looked at him, surprised. "You saved me," he said. "Not just in that canyon, long before that. When you stepped into my life holding that child like he was the only piece of your soul left, I saw something worth staying for." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't looking to be saved." "Doesn't matter," he whispered. "Sometimes we find what we need even when we're not looking." Micah's soft cry interrupted the moment, and Everly rose, moving to the adjoining room where Mabel had set up a cradle. She lifted the boy gently, rocking him back to sleep. When she returned, Judd was watching her with something deeper than admiration in his eyes. Weeks passed. Judd healed slowly but surely. By late fall, he was hobbling on a cane, and by winter, he walked unassisted, though he leaned on Everly often, more out of affection than necessity. The ranch rolled forward as the seasons changed. Snow dusted the hills, and the nights grew long. May ran the ranch like a general, but now she smiled more especially when she caught sight of Micah crawling across the porch or babbling in German to the cook. One night, as snow fell silently outside the window, Judd took Everly's hand in front of the fire. Micah slept between them, curled in a wool blanket. "I never thought I'd have this," Judd murmured. "Have what?" "A reason to stop writing." Everly turned to him, eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then stay." He kissed her softly, reverently, like she was something precious found after years of wandering. And when she kissed him back, she let go of the last pieces of the woman who'd stood trembling in the trading post months ago. She was no longer a mother on the verge of giving up. She was a woman who had built something from the ruins. The next spring, the hills turned green again. New calves were born. The wind carried softer songs, and at Redstone Ridge, a child named Micah learned to walk between two shadows who no longer ran from their pasts. Stay tuned for the final chapter. Everly's story isn't over, and some reckonings are still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss the storm that rides with the thaw. The thaw came hard that year. Snow melted into rivers that clawed through the valleys, flooding the lowlands and forcing everyone to patch, mend, and rebuild. The land woke up groaning, as if it remembered every frozen night and cracked bone of winter. But Redstone Ridge endured, fences held, roofs were patched, and fields began to green beneath the slush. Everly stood at the edge of the paddock, watching Micah toddle toward a curious goat with more courage than coordination. May stood nearby, arms crossed, her stern face hiding the hint of amusement in her eyes. "He's got legs like a colt," May said. "Wobbly but full of fire," Everly nodded. "He's his own kind of brave. Like his mother." They didn't say more, but the words lingered inside the ranch house. Judd sat at the long pine table, polishing the butt of his rifle with slow, methodical care. His legs still ached on rainy mornings, but he didn't limp anymore. Not much. Anyway, he glanced up as Everly entered, brushing mud from her skirt. "He chased a goat into the coop again," she said. Judd chuckled. "He's got no fear, no, and less sense." They shared a look. Then Everly moved to the sideboard, pulling out a bundle of letters Silas had sent from the trading post. She handed one to Judd. He read it slowly, his eyes narrowing. "There's talk in town about a man asking questions about a woman with a child. Said she passed through in a torn dress. No name. No husband." Everly went still. "Did they say who?" Judd shook his head. "Only that he's well-dressed, Eastern, carries himself like a banker or something worse." She sank into a chair. "I thought I'd put that life behind me." "You did," Judd said. "But sometimes the past don't stay buried." By the time night fell, the ranch was quiet. May had taken 2 hands to check the north fence, and Micah was asleep with 1 foot dangling from the cradle. Everly stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, eyes tracing the distant hills. Judd joined her. "He won't take him," she said quietly. "No matter who he sends. No, he won't." "I didn't run because I was weak," she said. "I ran because I refused to let Micah grow up in a house where cruelty wore a suit and smiled across the dinner table." Judd's voice was soft. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I owe myself one," she said. A few days later, the stranger arrived. He came in a fine black coat, riding a gleaming bay horse. His boots were polished, his mustache trimmed, and his words clipped with the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. He rode up to the ranch house and dismounted without waiting for invitation. "I'm looking for a woman," he said to May, who met him at the gate, shotgun resting easy in her arms. "Aren't we all?" She replied. She traveled. With a child, blonde hair, thin, might have gone by Everly. May said nothing. "I'm her husband." That word echoed across the yard. Everly stepped out of the barn, jaw clenched, a pitchfork in her hands. "You lost the right to call me that the day you raised your hand to me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The man Victor blinked in surprise. "I came to take my son back." Judd appeared from the bunkhouse, rifle slung low. "You'll leave with broken legs if you try." Victor's eyes shifted, calculating. "You're harboring a runaway. I could have you arrested." "You go right ahead," May sighed, stepping closer. "Then explain to the sheriff why there's bruises and old letters and bank records with your name on funds stolen from your wife." Victor went pale. "She's lying." "No," Everly said. "I'm surviving, and I'm not running anymore." Victor took a step forward. Judd blocked him. "This land's free, but you ain't welcome." Micah's cry came from inside the house, and Everly turned instinctively toward it. That simple motion, so natural, so fierce, seemed to break the last thread of Victor's illusion. He adjusted his coat. "You'll regret this." "No," Everly said. "I already regretted marrying you. I don't have room for more." He left. No one waved. Weeks passed. Spring gave way to summer, and Redstone Ridge bloomed with life. New foals, new hope. On Micah's 2nd birthday, they held a small gathering. May baked a cake. The ranch hands gifted a hand-carved wooden train. Judd gave Micah a small tin star pinned gently to his shirt. "He's the law here now," Judd joked. "Best behave." Everly watched her son run through the grass, laughter trailing behind him like wind through wheat. Later, Judd took her hand beneath the stars. "You think he'll remember any of this?" "No," she said, "but I will. And I'll remind him every day how he was wanted, fought for, loved. You ever think of leaving?" "Only if you're with me." He kissed her again, slower this time, no urgency, just peace. And in that moment, under the endless western sky, with their son asleep inside and a quiet world stretching before them, Everly finally knew. She hadn't just survived, she had begun. The end. If Everly's journey touched you, subscribe. There's more to come, new stories, new hearts, and always a reason to believe again. Spring's glory at Redstone Ridge settled into a gentle summer, the valley humming with life and the promise of new beginnings. Everly awoke before dawn, as was her habit, to the soft bleating of goats and the whisper of wind through the oaks. She carried Micah to the porch, where he sat in his little chair, legs swinging, eyes bright as the morning star. Judd appeared, a basin of water in hand and a towel slung over his shoulder. "Morning, love," he murmured, kneeling to wash Micah's hands before breakfast. Inside, May had the stove ablaze, Annie's raisin bread baking in the hearth, its scent mingling with coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The ranch was stirring, men preparing horses, helpers gathering eggs, and the cook humming a tune of her Bavarian youth. Everly paused at the threshold, watching it all. The memory of that desperate night at the trading post lingered at the edges of her mind, a shaded corner of a life she'd left behind. But now the trade post seemed a world away, its dust and despair replaced by the warmth of hearth and the sound of laughter. After breakfast, Everly and Judd headed to the fields. They walked side by side, Micah trailing behind, chasing a butterfly, with all the solemn determination of a tiny adventurer. Everly's hand found Judd's, their fingers lacing together with the quiet ease of two souls who had faced the abyss and chosen one another. They paused at the new fence line. The barbed wire gleamed in the sun, the post set true and strong. "It's held so well," Everly said, running her hand along the taut wire. Judd nodded. "Thanks to you. I saw you standing up to those rustlers, never flinched once." She let out a breath, "Because I had something to fight for." He smiled, stepping closer. "And I have something to stand beside." Her heart fluttered as she looked into his eyes. This was home. These fields, this life, these people, they were the life she had reclaimed. Yet, even in paradise, trouble found its way. A week later, the distant rumble of thunder greeted them at dawn. Not the welcome kind that meant rain, but the rolling of wheels and the clatter of hooves along the east road. Everly's breath caught. She recognized the dust clouds. A wagon train, heavy, burdened. Riders emerged, a merchant's caravan struggling under the weight of goods. Their horses labored, and the drivers gaunt with desperation. The lead driver, a lean man with sun-flecked hair, tipped his hat. "Beggin' your pardon," he called. "Is this Redstone Ridge? We need water and fast." Everly exchanged a glance with Judd. May emerged behind them, rifle in hand, assessing the newcomers. Judd approached. "You're welcome here, but what troubles you?" The driver's shoulders slumped. "Bandits. They hit us near the canyon. Took feed, spooked horses, left us half dead. We're low on water, low on hope." Everly's chest tightened. Images of that ambush, of Judd pinned by gunfire, washed over her. She squared her shoulders. "Bring your wagons to the spring. May'll send horses for your stock. We'll feed you. And if you stay a day or two, we'll spare you passage." Relief rippled through the driver's face. "Thank you, ma'am." "Thank you." Over the next days, the ranch became a sanctuary. Helpers fetched water, mended wagons, and shared corn porridge. Micah, oblivious to sorrow, offered goat's milk in chipped cups, and giggled at the driver's children, teaching them a lullaby. He learned in German that the travelers left richer in provisions, but more so in gratitude and tales of the woman who would have given her baby to survive and instead gave them life. That evening, as the caravan departed, the drivers turned back waving. Everly stood beside Judd on the porch, Micah asleep. In May's arms, the sky blazed with sunset. As if the world itself applauded, Judd put an arm around her. "You see," he said quietly, "this life you fought for yours to give." She smiled, leaning into him. "I'm not the woman who begged at a trading post anymore. I'm something better." And with that, they turned inside, the door closing. Softly on the day's last light, ready for whatever dawn would bring next. Stay with us. This ridge holds many stories, and the horizon still calls. The days that followed brought a strange quiet to Redstone Ridge. Not silence, exactly, but the kind of hush that settles after something meaningful, a wedding, a birth, a battle barely survived. For Everly, it was the quiet of stability, of soil turned rich by old storms. And with that quiet came something she hadn't expected. The stirrings of restlessness. It started small. She'd find herself waking before the rooster crowed, staring out at the southern ridgeline like it held some unanswered question. Her hands would tighten on the reins when she rode out with Judd, her thoughts drifting to memories not yet resolved. One afternoon, she and May were mending a section of pasture fence when May spoke, eyes on the wire. "You ever think of leaving?" "Again?" Everly blinked. "No, but I think about the girls still stuck in the life I ran from." May nodded slowly. "Figured as much, some part of you still burning for them." "I can't help it," Everly admitted. "I have a home. Now make us safe. But what about the ones still being traded like stock? Bought, sold, abandoned." May set her pliers down. "You want to fight for 'em?" Everly didn't answer right away. Her gaze settled on the distant hills. "I want to give them what I found here." That night, she brought it up to Judd. They sat by the fire, Micah curled in her lap, half asleep and clutching his wooden star. "I want to ride to the outposts," she said. "The dusty towns, the lonely posts, the places no one watches, find the women like I was, show them another way." Judd watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we make it part of the ridge. You'd let me go?" "I'd go with you," he said softly. "We don't keep the good things to ourselves, Everly. We spread 'em." And so the Redstone outreach began. May wrote to the circuit. Judge and got it chartered. Silas helped organize supply drops from the trade post. And Everly, with Judd and 2 trusted ranch hands, began riding once a month to the rougher settlements. They offered shelter, food, medicine, and most of all, a way out. Everly told her story, not as a sermon, but as a shared scar. Women listened. Some wept, a few ran. But many followed. By midsummer, Redstone Ridge had taken in 4 more girls. One of them, a girl no older than 15, carried her baby in a flour sack tied with twine. She never said much, but clung to Everly like a shadow. Another, older and angry, tried to steal a horse on her first night and got stopped by May's warning shot. She cried for 2 days straight and asked to stay on the 3rd. The ranch changed. Not noisily, but like a stream that deepens its course. More hands were hired, more bunkhouses built. May, ever watchful, grew fiercer and prouder, guarding the newcomers like a lioness. Judd carved a sign at the main gate, "Redstone Ridge, a place for the left behind." One evening, as cicadas sang and lanterns glowed from every window, Everly stood with Micah on the porch. He was taller now, curious, full of questions. He pointed to the hills. "Where do the new ladies come from, Mama?" She bent down and looked him in the eye. "From places where no one saw them. But now they're seen. Here, we see everyone." He nodded solemnly, like he understood more than he should. "Will I help them too?" She smiled. Yes, that's what we do now, we help. The door creaked, and Judd stepped out with a shawl for her shoulders. You'll catch chill. Everly took it and leaned into him. I don't feel the cold anymore. Because you burn too bright, he murmured. They stood together under a prairie sky flecked with stars, while behind them, the rooms of Redstone Ridge flickered with new life, women who had walked out of fire and into something like grace. And Everly, who had once stood on a dusty porch begging for a child's salvation, now stood as the light that welcomed others home. To be continued. Subscribe and ride with us. There are more journeys to make and more lives to redeem. Autumn settled into Redstone Ridge with gold-leaf trees and the smell of wood smoke curling from every chimney. The air grew crisper by the day, and the mornings arrived with frost lace on every window pane. But it wasn't the cold that made Everly rise early each day. It was the lives waiting to be remade. Word had spread far beyond the nearest trade post, beyond the canyon and over the ridge lines. Folks whispered of the place where a woman could start over. A place where broken didn't mean worthless, and motherhood wasn't a sentence but a promise. The latest arrival was a woman named Lenora, once a schoolteacher, her wrist still marked from a marriage that tried to break her. She came riding side saddle on a borrowed mule, her son clinging to her back like a frightened kitten. She didn't speak the first 3 days. Then, during supper, she began humming a lullaby none of them had heard before, and by the end of the week, she was offering to teach the Ridge children. It was May who carved the new plank above the old tack shed. Schoolhouse. Everly, meanwhile, began writing letters, dozens of them. She wrote to judges, to church elders, to sheriffs whose loyalty she trusted. She signed her name with pride, sealing each letter with red wax and the imprint of a horseshoe, a symbol now known to many as the Redstone mark. She wrote not just for supplies, but for recognition, for protection, for reinforcements. And slowly, the answers came. One judge sent copies of rulings that gave women rights to their own land. Sheriff named Callahan arrived on horseback with 2 deputies and offered to patrol the southern trails to keep raiders at bay. And a widow from 2 counties arrived with a wagon full of wool, saying only, "You helped my sister. I help you." One cool afternoon, Everly found herself sitting with Micah and 4 other children in the new schoolhouse. Lenora taught letters using wildflowers pressed into books. Micah stumbled through his alphabet, but he grinned every time he got one right. Everly's heart swelled watching him, this boy she almost gave away, now helping anchor a movement that grew with every passing moon. That night, Judd found her out by the stable, feeding the horses. "You don't rest much these days," he said gently. Everly shrugged. "There's always someone coming, always something to mend." He leaned against the post beside her. "You afraid if you stop, it'll all fall apart?" She looked at him, a trace of sadness behind her eyes. "I'm afraid I'll stop feeling like I matter if I sit still too long." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. "You matter, Everly. Even if you never rode another mile or saved another soul. You mattered the day you decided not to run from your pain." She closed her eyes. "I just want to be worthy of the chance I got. You already are." The wind shifted, and with it came a distant sound, a wagon wheel rattling. Another traveler, another soul in need. Judd kissed her cheek. "Come on, let's meet him together." They walked down the drive hand in hand, the lamplight casting their shadows long across the dust. Behind them, Redstone Ridge glowed warm. Against the dusk, every window a lighthouse to the lost. And as the wagon creaked into view, its driver haggard, its passenger wrapped in a shawl hiding a baby, Everly stepped forward, not with fear or pity, but with certainty. "Welcome," she said. "You're safe now. This is home." The woman burst into tears, clutching her child. And Everly simply opened her arms. To be continued. Subscribe for more. Redstone Ridge is just getting started. And so is Everly's mission to redeem what others called ruined. Winter rolled into Redstone Ridge cloaked in silence and silver. Snow blanketed the world, muting the sound of hoofbeats and hammer strikes, turning the wild hills into a landscape of hush. But inside the ridge, warmth lived in every hearth and every heart. Everly stood at the window, wrapped in a quilt May had made the year before, watching Micah and the other children hurl snowballs at Judd, who had abandoned all dignity to dive behind a trough for cover. Their laughter rose into the frozen air, echoing off the trees. She smiled. Her home had become a sanctuary, not just for survival, but for joy. Still, even joy came with shadows. That night, while putting Micah to bed, he asked, "Mama, where's my real daddy?" Everly froze. Not because she didn't expect the question, but because she did. She sat beside him on the quilted bed. "He was a man who didn't know how to love right," she said gently. "He thought control was love, but love doesn't bruise. Love doesn't silence. Love lets you grow." Micah nodded slowly, eyes wide. "So Judd's my real daddy now?" She paused. "He's the one who loves you like a real daddy should." Micah grinned. "That's good. I like him better anyway." Later, she told Judd about the conversation. He sat quiet a moment, then said, "He's not wrong." January brought an unexpected visitor, a journalist from the Northern Territories. He arrived unannounced, wrapped in a thick scarf and carrying a notebook stained with snow. "I heard stories," he said to Everly, "about a woman who nearly gave her baby away and built a new world instead." She bristled. "We're not a story." "No," he agreed. "You're a revolution." She didn't trust him, but she let him stay. For 3 days he watched, listened, wrote. He sat beside May as she trained new hands, rode with Judd through snow-packed trails, and helped Lenora organize the tiny library. On the 4th day, he handed Everly the first draft of his piece. She read it slowly. The words bled truth, sorrow, grit, redemption. He hadn't glamorized the pain. He'd honored it. And he'd framed Redstone Ridge not as charity but as justice. She gave him permission to publish. 2 months later, letters poured in more than they could read in one night. Some were from women asking for help. Others were from people offering land, animals, tools. One letter held a deed to a plot of pasture in Oregon with a simple note, "For the next ridge." Everly stared at the map pinned to the kitchen wall. Her fingers traced paths across the western frontier roads, yet untraveled. That spring, they sent out their first outreach team. A wagon loaded with supplies, led by one of the women who had arrived a year before Celia, who had once wept in the barn loft, now standing tall and steady. Everly hugged her before departure. "Remember who you are, not where you came from." Celia gripped her tight. "I'm Redstone now." Back at the ranch, life moved on. Micah helped hatchlings break through their shells. May began training a new Mare who spooked at everything except Micah's voice. Judd expanded the forge, and Everly? She spent her mornings walking the ridgeline, planning, dreaming, forging a future in the snow-dusted wind. She no longer thought of herself as the woman who nearly gave her child away. She was a builder, a breaker of chains. And she had work to do. To be continued. Subscribe to walk beside her. This world is only beginning to feel her footsteps. Spring thundered into Redstone Ridge with a boldness that stole everyone's breath. The river swelled, fat and fierce with snowmelt. The hills turned from brown to emerald in a matter of days, and the colts galloped wild in the pastures like they owned the earth. Inside the bustling ridge, there was no more doubt. Redstone had outgrown its boundaries. What had once been a small sanctuary with a single bunkhouse and borrowed land had become a pulsing, sprawling beacon too big to stay hidden, too righteous to be ignored. The call for expansion had come not from ambition, but necessity. There were too many letters, too many women arriving with hollow eyes and children too light for their age. They came from mining towns, from mountain villages, from riverboats and rail cars. Some walked until their shoes tore apart. Some were carried, in arms, half-starved. They came because they'd heard of Everly Dot, and now Everly had to become more than one woman. She had to become a force. In early May, Everly rode north with Judd, May, and a small team of riders. Their destination, the land deeded to Redstone in Oregon, a stretch of overgrown pasture with a collapsed barn and a house stripped to bones. It was nothing, and it was everything. I can see it already, Everly whispered as she dismounted and stepped into the wind. The girls, the babies, the fields. May spat into the dirt and rubbed her hands together. We'll need 40 men in 3 months to make it livable. Judd rested a hand on Everly's shoulder. We've built harder from less. They named the land Emberfall. Back at Redstone Ridge, Lenra took temporary command, turning her soft-spoken demeanor into a quiet authority. Silas managed trade and supply lines. Micah, now old enough to help, spent his days delivering food and messages between outposts. He was the Ridge's first trueborn, and everyone treated him like Kindot at Emberfall. The work was brutal. Trees had to be cleared, fences built, wells dug. Men came from nearby ranches to help. Women from Redstone volunteered. May slept 3 hours a night, and Judd re-injured his shoulder lifting timber. Everly wore gloves until her fingers bled and kept a journal with every name and need recorded. One night, as they lay under the stars on cots around a fire, Judd whispered, "We're not just building buildings." "No," Everly agreed, eyes fixed on the sky. "We're building futures." By July, Emberfall opened its gates. The first girl to arrive was 14, with a black eye and a baby she refused to name. She didn't speak, but Everly took her hand, led her to a warm bunkhouse, and left soup on the doorstep each night. On the 4th day, the girl whispered, "His name's Caleb." By the end of the month, Emberfall had 10 new residents, a makeshift school tent, and its first community supper under lantern light. Back at Redstone, things were changing too. Lenra had started a literacy program for the women who never learned to read. May had organized a mounted patrol to protect travelers en route to the ridge, and Micah had begun asking questions that made Everly's heart twist. "Were you scared when you almost gave me away?" "Yes," she answered truthfully. "But I was more scared of what would happen if I didn't." He nodded solemnly. "I'm glad you didn't. So am I." Trouble, of course, found them. It came in the form of a preacher from downriver who called Redstone a den of sin and claimed Everly was a false prophet. He arrived with 5 men, shouting scripture and demanding the women be returned to their rightful guardians. Everly faced him on the front steps of the main house, wearing her work-stained boots and a faded red scarf around her throat. "I've read the Bible too," she said calmly, "and nowhere does it say a man owns a woman's soul." The preacher turned red, but May cocked her shotgun and stepped forward. "Get back on your wagon, or I'll make sure you're preaching to the angels by sundown." He left, but others came after, some with questions, some with fists. One night, a group of vigilantes tried to set fire to the storage barn at Emberfall. They were stopped by Celia and her crew before the kindling even caught. 2 men were tied to posts and left with their pants around their ankles in the cold morning light. The message was clear. Redstone fought back. Everly knew then it was time to formalize everything. With Silas and Lenora's help, she filed official township documents. Emberfall became a protected outpost under state law. Redstone Ridge was declared a charitable settlement. And Everly Cartwright, once the woman who tried to give her baby away, was now listed in government records as founder and director. Redstone Coalition. The name didn't sit easily on her tongue. She wasn't interested in titles, that she was interested in results. Late one summer evening, she sat on the porch with Micah curled beside her, fast asleep. Judd came out with 2 mugs of cider and sat beside her. "You've built an empire," he said. watching the horizon. From desperation. From motherhood, she corrected. He nodded. She sipped her cider. It's not enough. Nothing ever is. That's how we keep moving. She looked out into the dark. I want 10 more ridges. 1 in every corner of this country. Then we'll build them. I want laws changed. I want women to own land without permission. I want girls to walk through towns without being stared at like meat. Then we'll fight for that too. She smiled softly. You don't even flinch. He leaned over and kissed her temple. I flinched the day you almost left me. I'm done with fear. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Everly whispered, I almost gave away my heart. When I gave away Micah, but the world gave him back to me. And now I'm giving the world something better. And with that, she rose, lifted Micah in her arms, and walked inside. Because revolution doesn't rest. It dreams. It builds. It rises. Again, to be continued. Subscribe to stand with her. The fire hasn't gone out yet. And the world still needs redstone. Summer bled into autumn like honey, poured into tea, slow, golden, and richer than expected. The hills blazed orange, copper, and crimson, and Redstone Ridge swelled with the rhythm of harvest. Children ran between rows of corn taller than a man. Women stirred kettles of spiced apples, their laughter lifting over the fields like hymnals. But beneath the celebration, Everly felt something shifting. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the sense that the world had begun to watch. The first newspaper article had been printed a month ago, a glowing review in a Portland publication that called Redstone Ridge a miracle of grit and grace. Then came a second, this time from Denver, full of praises and questions. Who funded it? Who was this Everly Cartwright? What did she really want? She'd read the articles with Micah curled against her side, his small finger following the lines of print. Does that mean you're famous? He asked. Only to the people who matter, she said, brushing his hair back. But fame brought scrutiny. One afternoon, a man arrived in a black coat and a waxed mustache, claiming to be from a legislative office. He wore polished boots and had the sort of handshake that felt more like a grip of control. I represent certain interests concerned about your settlements, he said, scanning the ridge like it was a ledger. Everly stood on the porch, arms folded. Concerned about what? The structure, the lawfulness, the long-term effect on traditional family values. May stepped out behind her, rifle in hand. The man took a step back. We're lawful, Everly said flatly. And as for family values, we're the only family some of these women have. He made notes in a leather-bound book. You'll be hearing from us. You already have, she said, and shut the door in his face. 2 nights later, someone cut the fence near the east pasture. A dozen goats wandered into the hills. It took 4 hours and every able-bodied teen to retrieve them. Everly found tracks in the mud boot prints, cigarette butts, and 1 matchbox from a saloon 50 miles east. The message was clear. You're a threat now, Judd said grimly. As they patched the fence in silence, I was always a threat, Everly replied. I just finally have something worth defending. The next week brought another surprise. A tall, sharp-featured woman arrived at Redstone's gate, wearing traveling leathers and a star-shaped badge pinned to her chest. Marshall Connolly, she said, Territorial Authority. I'm here to offer a proposition. Everly raised an eyebrow. What kind? I want to build a chain of safe stations across the region. Halfway stops for women and children in flight. I want Redstone to be the mother tree. Everly studied her. You don't want to control us? No, I want to replicate you. It was the first time Everly cried in front of a stranger in over a year. That night, they signed a pact Redstone Ridge would become the anchor for a new program, Haven Trails. With public funding, private donations, and local cooperation, they'd plant roots in 12 more counties. Emberfall would serve as a blueprint. Micah helped paint the sign for the first outpost. Haven House Number 1, no shame here. With growth came loss. Lenora, the quiet schoolteacher who'd saved half the ridge from ignorance, took a post in Haven House Number 2. It broke Everly's heart to see her go, but Lenora kissed her cheek and whispered, "I'm only doing what you taught me." May, too, surprised them all. After 3 years guarding Redstone like a fortress, she began talking about retiring to a small cottage near Emberfall. "Time for younger hands and softer eyes," she said. The morning she left, every woman and child lined the lane, clapping as she rode off on her favorite mare. May didn't look back, but that night they found a note carved into the porch rail, "Still watching." Everly held the note like a relic. In late October, with frost crawling down the windows and pumpkins lined along the fences, Everly received a formal invitation from Washington. The president's wife had read about the ridge. She wanted Everly to speak at a women's conference in the Capitol. Everly laughed. "I don't speak for crowds." Judd handed her a clean dress from the laundry. "Line, you speak for more than you know." So she went in a crowded ballroom of ladies in satin gloves and pearl earrings. Everly stood in boots still stained with dust and told them the truth. "I am not a hero," she said. "I am a woman who once believed she was worthless. And now I run towns that lift others from that same lie." The room stood silent, then it erupted. She returned to Redstone. With a new sense of purpose, she began organizing a council of survivors, women who had lived through trafficking, abuse, and abandonment. They weren't just rebuilding, they were leading. Each ridge would have its own council. Micah, now nearly 10, watched her one afternoon from the porch. "You're building a whole country," he said. Everly chuckled. "Just a better world." He tilted his head. "Can I build one too?" "You already are, my love." On the last night of the season, the ridge hosted a harvest gathering. Long tables lined the orchard, lanterns hung from every tree. Musicians played fiddles and flutes while children danced barefoot in the grass. Everly stood beside Judd, her hand resting over his. "Think we'll ever stop?" he asked. She looked around, at Micah chasing fireflies, at the girls with laughter in their eyes again, at the ridge pulsing with life. "No," she said, "but I think we'll rest better between the battles." He nodded. To rest between the battles. And they clinked tin cups under the stars, because in Redstone Ridge, the fight for dignity was eternal. But so was the joy. To be continued. Subscribe to join the journey. The ridge still rises, and Everly still leads the way. Winter returned to Redstone Ridge not as a harsh master, but as a wise old friend. The snows came softer this year, the wind less biting. It was as though even the sky had begun to respect what had been built here. Everly moved slower these days. Not from age, but from the weight of so many stories etched into her spine. She could walk the paths of the ridge with her eyes closed and name each tree by the sound of the wind through its branches. But her vision had grown beyond these fences. She dreamed in maps now. Haven. Trails had grown from an idea into an artery, a living, pulsing network across the region. There were now 6 official ridges, each one a sanctuary. Each one echoing the first promise. No shame here. No fear. No turning away. But as the light grew, so too did the shadows. In early December, Everly received a letter sealed in black. Waxed out inside was a photograph of a burned-out carriage and a note, "You cannot erase men." Judd found her holding the paper like it might bite. He read it once, then again, then set it aflame in the hearth. "They want fear," he said. "They won't get it," Everly replied. But her jaw clenched harder than usual that night. Within a week, she received 2 more letters, one threatening, one mocking. Emberfall reported vandals tearing down their signage. Haven House Number 3 had its windows smashed in. Rumors of bounty hunters, real ones, began to reach her ears. So she called a gathering. Representatives from every ridge, every Haven house, every allied ranch and post came to Redstone. They filled the great barn, each bringing stories, wounds, and questions. "We are not a rebellion," Everly told them, standing on a hay bale. "We are a redefinition. And they're scared because we are working." Silas stood beside her. "They think they can stop us with fire and bullets, but they forget we've already survived worse." May, who had come out of retirement, just for this, barked from the back, "Let him come. I've still got 2 good knees and a sharper aim than God." The room erupted with laughter and war cries, but Everly's eyes stayed focused. "Build stronger. Link arms. If one ridge falls, the others must rise. No woman gets left behind. Not again. Not ever." The vote was unanimous. Redstone would begin. Training marshals female riders trained in protection, diplomacy, survival, and strategy. Not warriors, guardians. Micah dubbed them the Cinder Guard. The first class of 8 rode out before Christmas, their red scarves billowing like banners. In the quiet of New Year's Eve, Everly sat by the fire with Micah asleep at her feet and Judd reading beside her. "You never stop," Judd murmured. "If I do, something will slip through," she replied. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" She looked at the flames. "I don't know. Maybe a school for girls who want to lead. Maybe a place where mothers who never got to be mothers can start again. Maybe just a long porch and a chair that doesn't creak." Judd smiled. "All sounds good, long as you're beside me." "I will be, until my last breath." January brought tragedy. A message came from Haven House number 4. Celia, one of Everly's first daughters in the Ridge, had been found dead, ambushed on a supply run. Throat slit, child taken. Everly collapsed to her knees. Micah found her in the barn an hour later, sobbing into a feed sack. He didn't speak, just held her. After the burial, Everly locked herself in her study for 3 days. When she emerged, she was not the same. She had a new list. Names of enemies. Names of allies. She contacted federal marshals, bribed senators, and called in every favor owed from Portland to Austin. She demanded protection, witnesses, change. She sat in courtrooms and held mothers who screamed for justice. And she found the child. The baby, just over 1 year old, was recovered from a smuggling ring near the coast. Everly rode there herself, tearing through a rainstorm with Micah and May behind her. She took the child into her arms and whispered, "You're safe now. We lost 1 light, but we won't lose yours." The rescue made national news. Redstone Ridge became more than legend. It became law. By spring, Everly's name was on the lips of senators, preachers, and bandits alike. Some called her dangerous. Others called her the mother of a movement. She didn't care. She was planting Ridge #7. This one, in the shadow of a coal town, where women were sold with contracts and children carried coal buckets instead of books. She set the first cornerstone. Herself. Micah placed the second. And when a man tried to block her path, she stared him down and said, "You're not my fear. You're my fuel." He stepped aside. One night, back home at Redstone, Everly walked the trails alone. She stopped at the old fence line, the one where Judd first kissed her, where Micah first learned to walk. She knelt, touched the wood, and whispered, "I almost left it all. And now I hold more than I ever dreamed." The wind replied with silence, and she smiled, because the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything they'd built. To be continued. Subscribe to keep walking beside her. The road is long, but the ridge leads onward. The first dust storm of the year came early. March rolled in not with lambs, but with lions' hot wind whipping across the plains, clawing at the eaves of Redstone Ridge and tearing loose shingles like brittle leaves. The wind howled for 3 days. The people huddled inside, fires lit, food rationed. Children whispered stories in the bunkhouses, pretending they weren't scared. Everly wasn't pretending. She was tired. Not weary of the work, never that. but of being everywhere at once. Her fingers were in every page, every plan, every supply ledger. Haven House number 8 had lost its lead matron to a wagon accident. Ridge number 5 had 2 births and no trained midwife. Emberfall was asking for more books, more blankets, more hands. And Micah 12 now was starting to ask questions that she couldn't always answer. Why do we keep growing, Mama? Isn't it enough? It was a fair question. And Everly didn't know the answer, so she did what she always did. She stood before her people. They gathered in the meeting barn, candles lit in every window, hay dust dancing in golden beams. May sat near the front, arms crossed. Judd leaned against the post near the back, eyes steady. Micah sat beside the ledger table, swinging his legs. I know you're tired, Everly began. Someone coughed. Someone else murmured an amen. I know the road feels longer than it did a year ago. Or 5, but it's not because we're faltering. It's because we're rising. And when you rise, you feel the wind harder. She looked around. So we're not stopping, but we are going to breathe. And for the first time since the Ridge was founded, Everly announced a season of stillness. No new outposts. No new expansions. Just 4 months of tending what had already been planted. A Sabbath. The reaction was slow. Then came the applause. Then the weeping. Because even the brave need rest. That spring, Redstone flourished inward. The schoolhouse doubled in size. The forge expanded to teach trades to young women. The orchard grew its first pear crop. May hosted knife lessons behind the barn for girls who wanted to walk safe. And Micah started writing. He kept a journal, its cover bound in old saddle leather. He wrote about everything: births, repairs, laughter, weather. He asked questions. In the margins, one entry read, if Mama gave me away, would the Ridge still be real? Or would the world have missed its chance? Everly found the journal one evening and wept until dawn. When Micah saw her the next morning, he asked, was it too much? No, she said, kneeling. It was everything. She handed him her old journal, the one from her first days alone. Maybe the Ridge belongs to you next, he blinked. I'm not ready. Neither was I. By early June, Everly could feel the wind changing again. It wasn't just the season. It was something else, a knocking in her chest, a whisper in her spine. And then it came, a letter. This one hand-delivered, from the governor he wanted to meet. Not at the Ridge, in the capital. Behind closed doors. Judd frowned as he read. Feels slippery. It's too big to ignore, Everly said. If we don't sit at the table, we'll end up on the menu. So she packed a trunk, put on her best coat, hugged Micah, kissed May, and left a list of everything that needed tending. Then she rode. The capital hadn't changed much. Same suits, same cigars. Same marble that made her boots echo like gunshots. The governor was smoother than she expected. Spoke of unity, progress, integration. You've proven something powerful, Ms. Cartwright. But we need to think about regulation, standards, oversight. She narrowed her eyes. Oversight by whom? Well, us, she stood. You didn't build it. You don't get to fence it. Then it may fall outside protection. She smiled, slow and cold. We are the protection. And she walked out. The press picked up the story within a week. Everly Cartwright refuses governor's offer. Redstone declares autonomy. The newspapers called her a firebrand, a renegade. A pioneer, Micah called her brave. But the fallout was swift. Funding promises were revoked. Shipping lanes delayed. 2 suppliers doubled their prices overnight. Emberfall was hit with fines over fictitious permit violations. Everly returned to the Ridge to find morale strained. She gathered the women on the hill, overlooking the fields. We made this with our hands, she said. We'll do it again. They agreed. Silas found alternate shipping lines. May returned to oversee training. Women volunteered double shifts. The Ridge lived on less, but not with less dignity. Everly sold her own jewelry to buy seeds. And one morning, they woke to find crates of grain and medicine left anonymously at the gate. The tag read, "You saved my sister, I save you." The Ridge was never alone. By midsummer, Micah stood taller, his voice deeper. And he came to her one night, fireflies drifting in the air around them, journal in hand. "I think I know the answer to my question," she waited. "If you had given me away, you'd still have built Redstone, because it was always inside you. But I'm glad you didn't, because I got to see it become real." She kissed his forehead. "So did I." They sat watching the horizon, and Everly, for the first time in years, allowed herself a sigh, not of burden, but of release. To be continued. Subscribe. If you still believe a single mother can change the country, the next storm is coming, and the Ridge is ready. By the time autumn returned to Redstone Ridge, the leaves weren't the only things turning gold. The entire valley shimmered with a hard-won richness, not of coin, but of something deeper, trust. The kind that took years to build, sacrifice to maintain, and blood to defend. It echoed in the way women met eyes across fields, in the quiet confidence of the boys who grew up unlearning violence, in the way girls no longer whispered their dreams but shouted them. Everly stood at the heart of it, no longer just the founder of Redstone. She had become the memory of every woman who ever thought she was too broken to rebuild. But now the world wanted more than her story. It wanted her soul. The first inkling came in the form of a white envelope. Inside, a summons to testify before a national committee. Topic: civil reform, women's autonomy, and safe colonization models. The implication was clear. They didn't just want to understand Redstone. They wanted to replicate it, manage it, frame it in neat, legislative boxes. Everly paced the porch for hours. Judd watched her in silence, whittling wood like the past 3 years hadn't happened. "You going?" "I don't know. They'll twist it." "I know, but if you don't speak, someone else will. And they'll get it wrong," she sighed. "That's what I'm afraid of." Then right ahead of the lie. The journey east took weeks. She brought Micah, now nearly 13, and me, who insisted on dressing as a lady and sneaking 2 knives into her corset just in case. They arrived in a city of marble and gaslights where men in starched collars greeted them with tight smiles and tighter fists. The hearing chamber was enormous. Red carpet, cold benches, eyes everywhere. Everly wore a simple gray dress. No brooch, no scarf, just boots that still had Ridge mud on them. She stood, and she spoke. "I am not here to defend Redstone. I am here to remind you why it exists." She told the story from the beginning. The baby, the barn, the near giveaway, the shame, the climb. The women who came with nothing and built futures, the buried, the saved. The fact that Redstone never sought permission, it sought justice. When she finished, the room was silent. One senator cleared his throat. "Ms. Cartwright, are you proposing that this country rewrite its institutions around women like you?" She met his gaze. "No, sir. I'm saying your institutions are failing, and women like me are filling the cracks. Maybe you should ask why there are cracks at all." The headline the next day read, "Mother of Redstone Silences Senate with a Sentence." Back at the Ridge, things had not waited. Micah's journal had been discovered by a visiting writer. Without permission, excerpts were printed in a literary digest. The essay, raw and honest, captured the hearts of thousands. The child who was almost given away now documents the world his mother rebuilt. Donations flooded in, but Everly wasn't flattered. She was furious. She met the writer at the station. "You took his voice without asking." The woman, a young thing with ink on her fingers and apology in her eyes, nodded. "I was wrong, but I believed it deserved to be heard." Everly stared for a long moment. then said, "Next time you ask, because this place was built on consent." She handed over a basket of fresh bread. "Come for supper next week. You want the story? Earn it." By late November, Ridge Number 9 was underway in a floodplain town devastated by poverty and factory closures. Redstone volunteers laid sandbags by day and held sewing classes by candlelight. Micah traveled there alone for the first time, leading a team of teenage builders. When he returned, he was different, quieter, broader in the shoulders. More aware. "Did it go well?" Everly asked. "I taught a boy how to read," he said. "He's 12. Like I was when I started asking questions." "You're still asking." He nodded. "But now I know the answers matter." Then came the wind, stronger than before. A late-season storm that cracked trees like bones. Emberfall took the brunt of it. Roofs torn. A fever spread through the youngest bunkhouse. Everly rode through the storm like a ghost. She stayed 3 days, nursing children and sawing fallen beams. When she returned, Judd met her with a strange expression. "What?" she asked, pulling off her gloves. "There's a man waiting inside. Says he knew your mother." The world tilted. Everly stepped into the main house. A gray-haired man sat at her table, head clutched in shaking hands. "I met her once," he said. "On a train, long before anything. She gave me a ring to pawn. Told me to use it for my daughter." He handed Everly a locket inside. A photo of a woman she barely remembered. On the back, "You were always meant to shine. Forgive me." May. Everly wept like she hadn't in years, not from pain, from closure. The next week, she stood in front of the ridge and told the story. "My mother gave me life. And for years, I thought she gave me nothing else. But she gave me this too, a fire to do more. Be more. And now I pass it to you." She handed the locket to Micah. "Because this belongs to the future." The ridge wasn't finished. There were still wrongs to fight, laws to change, lands to settle. But for the first time, Everly wasn't afraid of letting go. She walked to the old barn where it all began, sat in the hay, remembered the baby she'd almost given away, and said aloud, "Thank you for choosing to stay." Micah stepped into the light, taller than her now. "I didn't choose. You did." She smiled. "Maybe we chose each other." They stood together. And the ridge ever-reaching stood with them. To be continued. Subscribe if you still believe. Redemption builds revolutions. The ridge hasn't finished rising. Not yet. The ridge felt quieter now. Not empty. Full, but still, like a lake before a storm. Everly could sense it. In the way the hens clucked low. In how the wind moved more like breath than song. In the way Micah stood at the porch's edge each morning, waiting, like he was trying to hear something before anyone else did. She wasn't wrong. The next chapter had begun before they even knew it. The first letter arrived in late December, slipped under the kitchen door like a secret. No return address. Handwritten. It read, "I was born in a town that never let me speak. My brother sold me into a marriage I couldn't escape. My baby died in a ditch before winter came, but I heard about Redstone. I don't know if I have anything left, but I'm walking. If I make it, save a bunk for me." Everly sat down slowly. She read it 3 times. Heart THUDING. It wasn't the letter. It was the tone. There were more coming. And they came, every week. Every courier, every bundle of grain brought another whisper from women on the road. Women fleeing what should never have been tolerated. Women walking from hundreds of miles with nothing but stories in their mouths and bruises on their backs. Some didn't make it. Some did. One woman arrived barefoot, carrying twins. Another rode bareback, bleeding from the thigh. A third showed up, dragging a wagon of 6 children, none of whom were hers. They all came with the same question: "Is this the place?" And Everly always answered, "It is now." Redstone outgrew Its name dot, it became a network of ridges connected by trails, signals, and signs only those who needed sanctuary could read. A horseshoe left upright, a red ribbon around a post. The call of a nightbird 3 times. Micah began designing maps secret. Once, he created a cipher. Taught it to the younger girls. Called it the Whisper Code. May grinned when she saw it. Clever boy. He's more than clever, Everly said. He's the new voice. But the world didn't stop resisting. Wherever a ridge grew, opposition festered. In County Hello, vigilantes lit a bunkhouse on fire. In Woodgrove, a judge ruled that women couldn't hold property unless backed by male signatures. Everly rode to both places. She stood in the ashes in Hello and planted a new foundation stone. She entered the courtroom in Woodgrove with documents. Signed by her, May, and 3 female landowners written in blood. The judge turned white, the ruling reversed, the ridge thrived. Then came the girl with no voice. She arrived in April. Alone, her mouth sewn shut. Thread, actual thread, Everly, shook as she cut each stitch. The girl never spoke, but she never left. She learned to tend bees. Carve wood. Paint. The other children called her Moth, because she always chased light. Micah taught her how to read lips. They became inseparable. And one day, while they shelled peas, Moth took Micah's hand, wrote one word on his palm. Home. Judd's health began to falter, subtle at first. A cough he waved off. A limp he blamed on old boots, but Everly knew he had given his youth to this ridge. Now it was asking for his bones. She lay beside him one night as he struggled for breath. I should have built you a quiet life. He rasped. You built me. The right one, she whispered. He smiled. Then I can go. No, not yet. But the next morning, she found his boots by the fire, empty. He had passed in the night. Peaceful, palms upturned like surrender. The ridge mourned for 7 days. On the 8th, Everly buried him beneath the oldest tree and carved his name into the roots. Here rests the man who stayed. Grief changed her, not into something weaker, into something unstoppable. She doubled the pace. Opened ridge number 10 and number 11. Trained new leaders. Formed alliances with shipping ports, orphanages, and even some forward-thinking military stations that she stopped asking for approval, that she simply built. Then came the child that no one wanted, dropped on the ridge's edge, wrapped in silk. No note. A girl, barely days old, pale blue eyes. Burned scars on her wrists. Micah took her in his arms and named her Jude. After the strong one, he said. Everly raised her alongside him. Jude became the sun. Even Moth smiled around her, even the elders. Wept when she laughed, but rumors rose again, talk of federal overreach. Plans to standardize all ridge-like settlements under a new name, welfare camps. Everly stormed into Washington with a binder thicker than a hymn book and a fury that no suit could withstand. We are not a model, she snapped. We are a movement. You don't fold us into your failed systems. You learn from us or get out of our way. They folded. On the 5th anniversary of Redstone Ridge, Everly stood before hundreds, ridge leaders, volunteers, children, survivors. Micah stood beside her. So did Moth. So did Jude, now toddling. Laughing, Everly raised her hand. This started with a girl too scared to keep her baby, and now we have planted a nation of refuge. You are the proof. You are the future. A cheer rose, not of worship, of promise, of roots taking hold. That night, Micah found her in the barn. She was holding Jude. I think I'm ready, he said. She looked up. For what? To lead the next ridge. She nodded. Then go. Just promise me you'll come back. He smiled, always. To be continued. Subscribe to follow Micah's first journey. The ridge is no longer just Everly's, it's theirs now. And it still rises. Micah rode west. Alone. Not because he wanted solitude, but because the road required it. It was part of the Ridge Code. Now each new leader must walk through wind, hunger, fear, and doubt before they earned the soil under their boots. Everly had done it with a baby in her arms. Micah did it with a letter in his coat. The town of Bitterhern was dying, once a mining boomtown, now a graveyard of rust and regret. The schoolhouse stood shuttered, the chapel boarded up. Most folks had either fled or sunk into the shadows, their trust gone with the last wage slip. Micah arrived with no banner, no weapon. Just his eyes, his hands, and the same gray coat his mother wore when she faced down the Senate. He set up camp in an old railway shack. And waited. The Ridge philosophy was simple: don't preach, don't command, listen, offer, build. And so he did. He helped an old woman re-thatch her roof, repaired a child's broken boot, shared dried meat with a family sleeping in a cellar. They watched. Then whispered. Then followed. Within 3 weeks, he had a crew of 6. 2 mothers, a widower, a boy with a stutter, and a former sheriff named Hollis who wore guilt like a second badge. They cleaned the chapel, not for sermons, but for shelter. They reopened the schoolhouse. Micah taught letters and maps in the morning, patched fences by night. And he wrote. Every night he filled pages. This place doesn't need a hero, it needs a reason. I'm planting one word at a time. Back at Redstone, Everly read every letter with trembling fingers. She missed him, but she knew letting go was not the same as losing. Trouble came on a Tuesday. A man named Brannock, part preacher, part loan shark, returned to town with 2 armed men. He'd once owned Bitterhern. Claimed he still did. He stepped into the old saloon turned meal hall and spat at the stew pot. This charity stinks of lies, he said. Where's the boy in charge? Micah stood. I'm not in charge, I'm just helping. Brannock sneered. Then stop, these people owe me. They owe no one their pain. Brannock drew his pistol, and so did Hollis. Guns didn't fire that day, but the war began, within days. Brannock posted bounties, false ones. He claimed Micah was a seditionist, that he trafficked women, that the Ridge was a cult. Micah didn't flinch. He planted a garden. He held a dance in the old barn. He wrote, they'll try to label us dangerous. That's how they justify their fear. Redstone sent help. Moth arrived with 3 Cinder Guard riders. She kissed Micah's forehead. You really built something. He smiled. Not done yet. She took Jude's locket from her neck. Everly says it's yours now. Micah stared at the silver, then put it in his pocket, not to keep. To remember. Then came the flood, early summer. Rains broke the dam, Bitterhern, drowned in mud, wreckage, and fear. Micah was in the hills when it happened. By the time he returned, 2 bunkhouses were gone. The schoolhouse stood on stilts of hope. And the chapel, his first shelter, was cracked to its bones. People looked to him. He climbed atop a barrel, spoke like his mother once had. We don't break, we bend, and tomorrow we build. They did. And Bitterhern bloomed. Back at Redstone, Everly stood beneath Judd's tree. She could feel it. Her son had become more than her son. He was now a ridge. Micah's final letter came on the wind. We named it Ridgelight, because it rose out of ruin and turned toward hope. I leave tomorrow, but I leave it in strong hands. I'll return soon with more stories than ink. Everly cried, then saddled her horse and rode to meet him. They met halfway beneath the sky that hadn't chosen sides. She dismounted first. He hugged her before she could speak. Home? He asked. She shook her head. No. Forward. And together, they rode. To be continued. Subscribe if you believe sons can carry legacies their mothers once wept for. The ridgeline now stretches across a nation, and it's only just begun. The road home wasn't quiet. It thundered with hooves, with hope, with the kind of silence that only exists between 2 people who've seen war and still believe in peace. Micah and Everly didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Every gust of wind felt like a page turning. Every mile forward, A promise renewed. Redstone Ridge shimmered like a dream when it came into view. It was bigger now, not in size, in spirit. There were murals on the old canteen walls, portraits of girls who once arrived in chains, now painted as queens. The orchard had a swing. The forge had music. There were more men now, but only the kind who came to build, not to own. And the library had doubled. Everly blinked back tears. Micah whispered, "It waited for you." She smiled. "No, it grew because I left." Moth was waiting. So was May. And Jude now 5 ran to them with arms open wide, braids swinging, voice high with laughter. Micah scooped her up. "I brought stories." "Did they have dragons?" she asked. "No," he said, "but they had girls who burned down lies." Jude nodded solemnly. "Good, I hate lies." That night, the ridge held a fire. Not just any fire, a vigil of names. A tradition started the year Micah turned 15, when Redstone decided to honor not just the living, but every woman whose name was almost lost. Each villager stood, one by one, and spoke a name aloud. My grandmother Ruth, who never saw freedom. My sister Eliza, who fought back. Myself, before I remembered, I mattered. The flames danced. The stars wept. And Everly, for the first time in her life, whispered her own name into the fire, not for validation, for legacy. Weeks passed, then a letter came, from the president's office. It requested Everly's attendance at the Capitol. Not for testimony, for consultation. They were forming a national committee on independent refuge communities, and they wanted her to chair it. Everly didn't answer. Immediately, she walked for 2 days. Slept beneath Judd's tree, visited the barn where she nearly gave Micah away. Then she returned and burned the letter. She wrote a new one. Sent it with Micah. If they want vision, she told him, send the future. Micah boarded the train 3 days later. Moth kissed his cheek. Jude gave him her toy compass. You'll find the way, she said. He promised to write. And he did. Every week, from railcars, from hotel desks, from the edge of conference halls, where men twice his age leaned forward to hear him speak. He didn't beg for policies. He didn't draft slogans. He told stories. Of girls named Moth. Of boys who cried and weren't ashamed. Of mothers who almost surrendered and then saved the world instead. And Congress listened. Back at Redstone, a woman arrived, older, bent from years of burden. She carried no pack, only a ring. Everly met her on the porch. The woman held up the ring. I think this belongs to someone you once were. It was the band Everly had sold to buy seed years ago. Somehow it had passed through dozens of hands, traded like a token of luck, always returning to someone in need. Everly pressed it into her palm. I'll give it to Jude, she said. Will she understand? Someday. May announced her retirement that spring. She handed her knife to Moth. You already know how to use it. But now you know when. Moth cried. May did too. Then left in the night with a note. Time to build somewhere colder. Let the fire spread. Jude grew louder, braver. She led ridge walks for younger girls, made up songs, kicked a bully in the shin and said, you don't get to shout just because you're afraid. Everly watched with awe. She's what I wanted to be, she told Moth. No, Moth signed. She's what you made possible. Micah returned by summer's end. Changed. Not hard. Honed. He'd been offered a government position. Declined. They need listeners, not leaders, he said. But I'll be their mirror if they ask. Everly kissed his forehead. He ducked, embarrassed. Still your boy, he whispered. Double quote always. She said, on the 10th anniversary of Redstone Ridge, they planted a grove. Each tree was named. Not after founders. After first arrivals. The girl with the sewn mouth, the mother of 6 borrowed children, the widow who taught music, the child who once almost wasn't wanted. Jude placed a ribbon around her tree. This one's for the baby Mama almost gave away. Everly cried. Jude hugged her knees. You kept me, right? Everly nodded. In every lifetime. That night, they danced. Not to celebrate survival. To honor expansion. Because the ridge was no longer a refuge. It was a culture. And it had outgrown fear. To be continued. Subscribe if you believe the next generation doesn't just inherit the fire, they fan it into light. The ridge isn't rising anymore. It has risen. By year 12, Redstone Ridge had become something else entirely. It was no longer a place you arrived at. It was something you carried with you, carved into the gait of every girl, who no longer flinched when footsteps approached behind her, etched in the songs the children sang while hauling water or planting rows, woven into the letters sent between settlements that now stretched from coast to coast. Signed always with a single phrase, "The ridge rises." Everly had stopped counting seasons. The only time she remembered was in scars, in rebuilds, in laughter. She knew the ridge could live without her now. And yet, it still needed her. Not as its architect, but as its memory. Trouble came again, as it always did, but this time, it wore a tie. A young governor, recently elected, rode into Redstone with photographers, promises, and a platform built on uniting reform with responsibility. He toured the ridge like it was an exhibit. Micah bristled. Moth refused to speak to him. Jude rolled her eyes, but Everly, always the calm in the storm, invited him to dinner. He sat at her table, folding napkins like power-folded people, Miss Cartwright. He said, "You've done something remarkable here. But growth needs oversight." Everly smiled. "You mean control?" He chuckled. "I mean partnership." She poured him tea, then calmly handed him the guest ledger. "This is the name of every woman who walked here from somewhere unspeakable. You want a partner? Read every line, then ask me again." He didn't make it past page 3. He left before dawn. The next week, he endorsed funding for autonomous settlements, without strings. Jude turned 6. She wanted a hammer. Everly gave her 3. Micah built her a bench. She carved her name on the bottom. "I want to be the one who makes places," she said. "You already are." Moth signed. Jude beamed. Moth published a book, a wordless one. Each page was a painting silent. Stories of escape, of rescue, of fireflies in jars labeled hope. It sold across the continent. Critics called it a revolution without sound. Moth shrugged. "Not everything needs volume." She signed. "Only meaning." May wrote from the north. She had built Ridge number 16 in an abandoned logging town. It was called Frostline. Snow 6 months a year. Wolves 3 months more. But the girls thrive. She wrote. They scream when they see stars for the first time. Real stars. That's how I know we're winning. One night, Jude asked Everly, "Were you scared when I was born?" Everly held her tighter. "I wasn't scared of you. I was scared of not being enough." Jude nodded, thinking. "I think that's what makes you brave." Micah began training the next ridge leaders. He called them the Line. 12 youths from different outposts, some barely teenagers, some weathered beyond years. He taught them map-making, diplomacy, how to read danger in a silence. He didn't teach them to fight. He taught them to last. Everly started to walk. Slower. Not from age. From trust. The weight had shifted. She wasn't pulling the ridge forward anymore. She was watching it run. One evening, a stranger came. A man with rough hands, carrying a harmonica and a crumpled photograph. "I played music for your mother," he said. Everly stared. He handed her the photo. It was of her barely 2 years old, on a blanket. Woman's hands adjusting her bonnet. "Where did you get this?" "Your ma gave it to me. Said if I ever found you, I should tell you this. You were never unloved. Just unready." Everly closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said, then handed him a bowl of stew. Double quotes. "Eat. Rest. You've carried something heavy." He nodded. That winter, the ridge lost someone. Not Everly, not Moth. Girl named Cassie. 10 years old. Fever, The ridge buried her beneath the songtree, where children wrote their names into the bark. Jude left a drawing there. A bird flying toward a mountain. And wrote, "She didn't fly alone." That night, Everly stood beneath the stars. And whispered, "We have not saved everyone, but we have made saving possible." Micah stood beside her, and that's everything. To be continued. Subscribe if you believe memory is the bridge between legacy and action. The ridge remembers, and it keeps moving forward. By the 13th year, Redstone Ridge was no longer a sanctuary. It was a sovereign idea, a living network stitched across wilderness, desert, prairie, and storm. An unbreakable root system of hope, quiet and deliberate, but impossible to dig out. And somewhere inside it, a woman named Everly Cartwright stood beside a river with her boots off and her hands in the current, whispering thanks to a world that once almost swallowed her whole. Jude was nearly 7, sharp as creek ice, bold as summer thunder. Her drawings lined the barn walls now, all signed with her full name, Jude E. Cartwright Ridge. Too long? She asked. Micah smiled. Just long enough to carry history. Moth had taken a dozen girls and founded a new post called Silverbend, an artist's haven, a sanctuary for the voiceless. Her paintings now adorned courtrooms, clinics, and even a government building, not because she chased fame, because someone needed to remind the world what quiet could build. Micah had become a figure of paradox, known in every territory but never owned by any. Offered titles, rejected them all. Called by one name only, the boy from the first ridge. He carried it with pride. And humility. Because behind every ridge stood 10 women who dug graves and planted seeds with the same shovel. One morning, Everly found a cylinder box by her door. Inside, a torn, soot-stained sign, one word visible, FOUNDLINGS. It had once hung above the auction block in the town where she nearly gave Jude away. A note was tied to it. "Thought you'd want this. Place shut down last fall. Turns out, when girls stop believing they're trash, the market collapses. You were right. A friend." She burned the sign. Fed the ashes to the orchard. "Let the past bloom better," she whispered. But not all bloomings came easy. A plague rode the wind that spring, quick, choking, silent. 2 ridge outposts shuttered. 3 leaders died. Everly rallied the lines. Jude helped deliver supplies. Micah sent riders across every post with handwritten health instructions and moth-painted door signs that read, "Still breathing, still building." Loss came, but so did resilience. On the longest night of the year, Everly lit a single candle. And placed it in the window of the ridge's oldest house, the house she had once cried in, the house that held the memory of her knees buckling and her arms lifting Micah skyward. Jude asked, "Why one candle?" Everly answered, "Because someone might be walking still." And someone was. That winter, a girl arrived with frostbitten hands and a notebook full of blueprints. "I don't want safety," she said. "I want a forge." Jude gave her a pair of gloves. Micah handed her a hammer. Everly nodded. "Then build. And name it something fierce." She did. The forge was called Emberspire. Its first bell rang on a day when the sun melted icicles into song. Jude's birthday came. She asked for a story, but not from Everly. "Tell me how you almost let me go," she said. "And why you didn't." Everly sat, spine straight. "It wasn't because I was brave. It was because someone, maybe God, maybe hope, maybe Judd, put a hand on my shoulder and said, 'Not yet. Try again.'" Jude leaned close. "I'm glad you did." Everly closed her eyes. "So am I." Later that night, Jude wrote her first letter to a girl in Ridge #9. It began, "You're not broken, just buried. But roots are strong under soil." Everly didn't cry much anymore, but when she stood before the full ridge, over 300 gathered for the 13th assembly and saw girls in blacksmith aprons beside boys holding poetry, She wept. Micah opened the gathering with a single sentence. We're not what they said we were. Thunderous applause, not for rebellion, for arrival. That night, Everly wrote a final journal entry. I once tried to give away the one thing that saved me, and in staying, he saved hundreds. What we build is never about just us. It's about who we make room for. She closed the book, left it on the porch. For the next girl, for the one still walking. The ridge still rises. The ridge still remembers. The ridge still waits. And somewhere, a girl is about to whisper, I thought no one wanted me. And here. Back. Wrong. We've been waiting for you. The end. Thank you for walking every step. Subscribe if you believe one woman's strength can become 100 villages. And then a world.